What's up, guys? This is Zach here. December 13th brings us the latest cinematic installment in the Lord of the Rings universe. With that is bound to be video games, memorabilia, and book sales. Likewise, Lord of the Rings, currently the only MMORPG on the market that lets you explore Middle-earth, has just released a brand new expansion, Helms Deep, featuring new zones, a level cap increase, and the ability to play through the iconic battle for Helms Deep, as is its namesake. Around this time last year, we provided a first impressions video for Lord of the Rings Online. This is more of a second look video, paying particular emphasis on changes that have been made to the game since the previous installment. Lord of the Rings Online's Helm's Deep expansion takes place shortly before and during the Lord of the Rings Battle for Helm's Deep, meaning the game takes place shortly before the end of the Two Towers. Given that Lord of the Rings Online released in 2007 and took 6 years to make it through the second book, I suppose we can expect Lord of the Rings Online to exist for roughly 3 more years before Frodo reaches Mount Doom and Turbine shuts down the servers. Now obviously I'm kidding. Lord of the Rings Online has been around for quite a while and has seen numerous expansions that, while not as expansive, if you will, or ambitious as your typical WoW expansion, they're mostly high quality and offer plenty of new adventuring content for players, even if most of the content is relegated towards players that are higher level. Helm's Deep really is no different here. The game sports a series of storyline quests that comprise books 11 through 13, beginning with the journey to Edoras and ending with the iconic battle for Helm's Deep. The landscape adds new regions located in western Rohan. These include the flat, fertile lands of the Broadacres, and excuse me if I'm mispronouncing any of these words, the wild Stone Deans, and the grasslands of Kingstead, among other zones. Unfortunately, Helm's Deep does not feature any new instances or raids. Instead of traditional in-game content, Turbine has opted for a more unique approach, implementing what they call big battles, the first of which being the battle for Helm's Deep. Starting at level 10, players can be instantly transported to the battle for Helm's Deep, where they can play solo or work with others towards fulfilling a variety of goals to repel the Orc invasion. Completing battle objectives rewards players with medals that they can use to spend on class equipment, accessories, or promotions. What are promotions, you ask? The game offers 3 progression paths: the Vanguard, the Engineer, and the Officer. Vanguards inspire allies and summon arrow strikes, engineers lay siege equipment and traps, and officers function as healers and grant defensive buffs. Unfortunately for this video, I did not have a max level character, but I was able to experience the Helm's Deep battle. While I was entertained enough, it was clear that repeat playthroughs would be necessary to fully understand just what's going on. I didn't think that the game really explained how to play through the battle well enough. Lord of the Rings has been a game that I've been conflicted over for quite a while. On one hand, it's an extremely solid MMO in a sea of some pretty subpar titles. On another hand, it's reflective of everything that's wrong with the MMO industry today. An industry that's too content to slap a big name IP on top of an established formula in hopes of bleeding money from fans, such as fans of the Lord of the Rings universe. In essence, Lord of the Rings was actually one of many WoW clones. It was the first of many. WoW clone. Now, what is a WoW clone? Well, these were legitimate questions players asked one another back in 2007. In 2007, WoW was still relatively considered the new kid on the block, and old school MMOs like EverQuest still had some legs left. 2007, though, was really when we began to see the first wave of WoW clones. Lord of the Rings Online is the first MMORPG to be largely regarded as a WoW clone. In many ways, it represented a shift in thought from developers attempting to bring forth new and often competing ideas to simply sticking with an established formula, hoping familiar mechanics and a popular IP would carry it far. When it was released, it was remarkable just how much the game resembled World of Warcraft in almost every aspect. The UI was the same, the combat was the same, the maps were the same, even progression was the same. This game was and still is World of Warcraft with the Lord of the Rings theme, albeit a much older and far less polished version of World of Warcraft. Right off the bat, I should mention the fact that this game is based off of the books, not the movies, and unapologetically so. I won't say whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it certainly is a thing. Don't go into Lord of the Rings Online expecting bombastic orchestral scores and massive, breathtaking New Zealand countryside. Instead, the game is far more low-key, in my opinion, honestly, far more low-key than it should be, and if not for the names of certain areas and a few notable NPCs, it's really difficult to distinguish Turbine's Middle-earth from rural Colorado. Music, sans brilliant scores in a couple of areas, namely Rivendell, is fairly non-existent or at best understated. The game allows you to play as races and classes that aren't standard fare for Middle-earth. You can play as any of the Free Peoples, with the armies of Mordor exclusively reserved for monster play, which is the game's honest attempt at some sort of realm versus realm PvP combat. Monster play never really caught on, and outside of a couple of really popular servers is pretty much dead. Graphically, the game has actually aged rather well. While I don't look at the game with the same sense of wonder and amazement I did back in 2007, bells and whistles added with the game's conversion to DX11 certainly do their part towards keeping the game fresh. The draw distance in the game is impressive, as it always was, giving you the ability to see into the horizon not unlike Oblivion or Vanguard Saga of Heroes. The textures, though, are decidedly old hat, and no amount of high resolution can save the fact that we simply see much better in 2013. Still, the game runs like a dream to look as solid as it does. The smooth 60 frames a second more than makes up for any aged appearance. Base gameplay necessarily hasn't changed at all. Character progression is still largely contingent upon completing quests and running skirmishes. Skirmishes are somewhat unique to Lord of the Rings and were introduced with the game's Siege of Mirkwood expansion. Skirmishes serves as mini dungeons that throw you and a computer-controlled partner into a series of battles. Finishing each skirmish gives a moderate amount of XP, as well as marks that can be spent to increase your partner's abilities in combat. The quest progression, though, is decidedly old hat. Quest progression may be streamlined at higher levels as it's more recent content, but the game's initial leveling content just seems frozen in another time. The common misconception is that MMOs really haven't changed since the release of WoW in 2004. While we haven't seen a huge generational leap like we saw from EverQuest to WoW, we've seen a number of tiny improvements here and there that really make it difficult to go back to previous game mechanics. We often don't even notice these until confronted with archaic game design in other titles. Chief among these sins from Lord of the Rings is the notion that solo quest lines should end with group quests, or that group quest lines were ever a good idea. In 2007, developers had no reason to believe that there wouldn't always be a sizable portion of the player base at all level ranges. After all, previous MMOs like Asheron's Call and EverQuest always seemed to have a healthy population throughout each level bracket. More solo-oriented MMOs turned out to be different. Players burned through the content and never returned. In 2013, Lord of the Rings just doesn't have that influx of new players it needs for players to complete these quests. New players are then forced to find a generous guildmate or leave quest lines unfinished. This can be problematic at times, as often finishing one quest line leads to another quest area. Without being directed to a quest area, how else does the player know where to go? Oftentimes quest lines just end, leaving players without a sense of where to go or what to do, despite there being 2 or sometimes 3 other zones filled with quests to complete. The game then becomes less about a sense of progression through the world and more about scrounging around for a series of activities that'll fill your XP bar. It's disappointing to see that while the leveling curve has been lessened somewhat in response to the gradual increase of the game's level cap, that the leveling content itself just hasn't been streamlined to the same effect as Cataclysm, WoW, Rift, or any recent MMORPG. Mana and HP regeneration is another issue. While the game is traditional in that aspect, meaning you can buy food and drink for regeneration, newer games like The Secret World do away with this entirely with relatively fast out-of-combat regeneration times. Out-of-combat regeneration without food and drink is a slow, plodding process that results in the player wanting to tab out and browse the internet rather than to continue playing. The game does feature a dungeon finder that works for instance dungeons as well as skirmishes. I couldn't really tell whether or not the dungeon finder was cross-server, but my guess would be no, since I stayed in the queue for over 2 hours. My max level character is only level 44, so it's possible the dungeon finder does get more use at in-game. All in all, the game is an unapologetic rehash of concepts that have been done before, but what it does very, very well. If you're a fan of WoW-style MMORPGs and you also love the Lord of the Rings universe, you owe it to yourself to check out Lord of the Rings Online. Head on over to the game's official website to learn more about it. Otherwise, head on over to MMOattack.com for more MMO gaming news, reviews, and giveaways.